Tribune with the caption, "Confrontation between leaders of the NLC and security men at the residence of the Minister of Labour and Employment, Dr. Chris Ngige." And this was in Asokoro in Abuja yesterday. EFCC witch hunting means, that's according to Saraki, we're not above the law, says the EFCC. Details on page 8.
And on the leadership, we have just below the masthead, Senate moves to make LG autonomy mandatory. Rider NRC beefs of security at Abuja Kaduna Rail. You find that on 27. And the bold headline says, Kano government weakens Emir Sanusi's power, splits Emirates, creates Rano Gaya Karaye Bachi Emirates. You find that on page 4. And the picture message, like the ordinary newspaper, is President Muhammadu Buhari, Vice President Yemi Oshibajo, retired Major General Paul Talfa, and Managing Director Mohammed Al-Khali during the inauguration of the commission. And just by the side of the picture message, imposition of National Assembly leaders has never worked. That's coming from Dumi. And at the bottom plate of the leadership newspaper, Kogi NAS, State Assembly members endorse Bello for second term. That's on page 8. At the bottom plate of the leadership, JNI to 5G, act fast on insecurity and poverty. You find that on page 6. Appeal Court rules on Osun governorship poll today. You find that on page 12. PMB inaugurates Northeast Development Commission on page 2. NSITF crisis, 9 hospitalized as NLC thugs clash at Ngige's residence.
Yes, indeed, Jumai. The Northeast Development Commission has a managing director and 3 executive directors. Other members are 1 each for the 6 geopolitical zones. While inaugurating the board, President Muhammadu Buhari called upon them to act fast and fast-track the rehabilitation of the region ravaged by Boko Haram. The Senate confirmed the nominees of the board sent by President Muhammadu Buhari in January, only last month. Major General Paul Tarfa, retired, is the chairman of the governing board. The other story of interest is related to the Senate. Most senators-elect are set to be pushing for the standing rule of 2011 for the election of presiding officers. This is because the Senate Standing Order 2015 was accordingly alleged to be forged. Therefore, it has no basis to be used. The police report on it is still pending. It will be recalled that the 2011 standing rules allows for open ballot system for election of the new officers. But just before the inauguration of the 8th National Assembly, a new standing rule surfaced and became a controversy. In fact, 2 principal officers were even charged to court on allegations of forgery, but nothing has come out of it. Meanwhile, the heat is on about the tussle for the presiding officers for the 9th National Assembly.
All right, so that will be next month. Yes, yes, if all goes well. The development in Kano is very interesting. I mean, for a number of reasons. As you said, there was an attempt earlier to create new Emirates in Kano, and that was by the civilian administration of Abubakar Rimi in 1982. And then, of course, after he lost the election and Bakinzuwo then became governor, all of that, was reversed. So 36 years or so later, more than 35 years later, you're having the Kano Emirate now being split into 5. I'm sure economists will tell you that there are serious financial implications arising, because if there are 5 first-class traditional rulers in the place of 1 that you used to have before, these are new cost centers. So who's going to take care of that?
And maybe it relates to the accolade of Kano. The people of Kano calls Kano Tumbingiwa, that is the tummy of the elephant. Now they have going to delve into what the contents of the tummy of elephants, and that by way of cost, because to have 5 first-class traditional rulers is very expensive.
Absolutely. Our people also say that you don't sleep on the day an elephant is killed, because everybody comes with a knife, to get a part of the game, as has happened. So we'll see how all of that plays out in Canada. Then the other one is the caution by the President of the Court of Appeal,
yes,
to counsel and also to public commentators on analysis of ongoing proceedings, yes, at the Presidential Election Petition Tribunal. The Presidential Election Tribunal, of course, is composed of the members of the justices of the Court of Appeal. So whether of an election petition tribunal or of normal court proceedings, remember, we say it here, when a matter is sub judice, you steer clear of it. You steer clear of it. But it's seeped into our public conversation that, matters that are in court are discussed freely. The details of those matters are discussed, opinions are proffered, but part of the media trial that you have seen in recent years is against our jurisprudence.
Yes, certainly. In fact, I think the Tribune reported it correctly. Some papers are saying the caution against analysis is to the press, but Tribune is reporting it correctly. Lawyers analyzing the cases on the pages of newspaper. In these days, you find out that after court sittings, lawyers will come and
address matters
or the arguments that are supposed to be addressed in court.
That's right.
And that is not correct. In fact, I'm surprised that it is going on because lawyers are supposed to know better. They are not supposed to come advocate whatever you want to say in court, not outside the court. Sometimes some of them will come and raise issues that have not even been raised in court to the press.
And the social media is actually helping matters.
That is actually the try by the media. Yeah. And media too, wittingly or unwittingly, get dug in by this idea that we want information and we want to hear from the lawyers.
Yeah, that's right. It's unfortunate. My suspicion, and I'm sure those who are familiar with these processes would also agree to an extent, is sometimes we mistake the American jurisprudence for our kind of jurisprudence. If you were to watch, say, the BBC, for instance, you are unlikely to find the kind of analysis that you find on CNN on legal issues.
Yes.
Now, the basis for the American system is one, the First Amendment. The First Amendment to the American Constitution is very elaborate. Okay. Plus the fact that they use a jury system. And the jurors are often sequestered. Yes. In other words, they are kept away. They have no access, to the media and so on and so forth. But ours is a single judge who sits and who, of course, has access to influences and so on and so forth if these matters are then further exposed. And, of course, if there is a matter before a court of law, why do you create an alternative court of law as we have seen outside the court? Absolutely.
Immediately outside the court.
Outside the courtroom, and then you have all kinds of analysts, who are proffering sometimes bewildering, if not patently ignorant opinions.
Yes.
Bayo.
Thank you.
Let's take our editorial. It's from the Nigerian Tribune and it's at page 13. The title of the editorial is The Drug Cartels at Airports. And of course, the peg for it is Zainab, whose case is very familiar, along with that of Ibrahim, who, of course, Zainab flew from Malam Aminu Kano International Airport to Saudi Arabia. They were just pretty lucky to have escaped the often very harsh decisions by the Saudi courts on drug trafficking. But it's the drug cartel that the editorial is focusing on, Bayo.
I think the drug cartel is not only peculiar to Malam Aminu Kano Airport. It is over many of our particularly international outfits. And you recall that the Board of the Customs and Excise and NDLEA have arrested several persons, either coming in or trying to ship out some of these drugs. And they succeed because there is a collusion between some of them and the officials that work at the airport. This is why they are able to succeed. In the case of Zainab and Ibrahim Abubakar, they observed that their baggage was below the 42 kilograms they are entitled to, and therefore they padded their baggage with drugs, and innocent persons became victims. In fact, many people did not know that the case has started as far back as in December.
Yes.
And so they've been in incarceration between December and until they are released this month. And for an offense they didn't commit and didn't know anything about. But credit must go to the father of Zainab, who took the issue up with the NDLEA, and also the prompt reaction of the NDLEA in fishing out the cartel, at least at Malam Aminu Kano Airport. I think the similar initiative should be taken at the other international outlets. Not only will it save Nigerians, many Nigerians, taking the risk. For instance, if you are given a visa for Malaysia and other Southeast countries, you are told there and then that is capital punishment, death, for drug trafficking. And people think they can always beat the system. So they should look both ways. As we take the measures here, on those other exit points, they should try and trace their counterparts who are also in alliance with those who, for instance, in the case of Zainab and Ibrahim Abubakar, somebody certainly was waiting in Saudi Arabia to collect those drugs.
As a pickup.
Yes.
Saudi Arabia authorities will not announce if they found people who have been conniving with them, just silently
they dispose of them.
Actually.
That is the law. The most sad thing is
after due process.
Yes. The most sad thing was that Ibrahim Abubakar is an octogenarian. The poor old man was just put in a quandary, something they didn't know about. Thank God, Zainab was up and doing, and she, in fact, was instrumental to securing Ibrahim Abubakar's eventual release, along with herself. Yes.
But we cannot continue to operate on an analog basis, Bayo. In the baggage or luggage room, once your luggage is on the conveyor belt, aren't there CCTV cameras to check the baggage handlers?
Usually it's at the point of putting it in the plane that it happens.
No. That's the cargo hold.
Yes,
you have baggage handlers.
Yes.
All right, Bayo. Thank you for being around.
Thank you for having me today.
Okay, it's Good Morning Nigeria on the network service still. We are taking a short break now. When we return, we'll get into our principal item for discussion.
They are there at the crack of dawn. They are there busy preparing while we rise for our day. They are there silently, guarding, waiting, listening, and watching. They are there ready in the sky above and the waters below, in the blistering heat of the day, in the dead of night, willing, indefatigable, determined in the defense of the sovereignty of our country. They are our first line of defense and our last. They who have paid the ultimate price in defending us. They are fathers and uncles. They are mothers and sisters and girlfriends and boyfriends. They are brothers and cousins and best friends and neighbors. They are classmates, colleagues, and citizens of this nation. They are our defenders and deserve our respect, our prayers, our thoughts. Nigeria, please support our armed forces.
Do you desire to improve your grammar and sharpen your pronunciation skills? If your answer is yes, then you need to attend a special 4-week course on English Grammar and Pronunciation for Broadcasters organized by NTA Television College, Jos. The course will expose participants to the nitty-gritty of English grammar and usage, which will enable them speak fluently and write as well as edit scripts flawlessly. Journalists, presenters, scriptwriters, television and radio news editors, secretaries, masters of ceremonies, and hosts of live events will find the course highly beneficial. Date, 13th May to 7th June 2019. Venue, NTA Television College, Rayfield, Jos. Course fee, 100,000 naira per participant. Accommodation inclusive. For more inquiries, please call 0803 3144 383 or 0806 9809 807. You can also visit our website on www.ntatvc.com. NTA Television College, Jos, training you to be the best you want to be.
We must get that trophy. It's the grand finale of the Trophy Five-a-Side Tournament, coming up on the 11th of May 2019 at the Campus Mini Stadium in Lagos Island. Over 3,000 fans across the country will have a chance to win a raffle ticket for an all-expense-paid trip to Tanzania, to be won by 4 lucky winners. Catch it all live on NTA Network, Kwese TV on UHF 32, and Channel 290 on your Kwese decoder. You can also download the Kwese iFlix on your mobile devices to stream live and get every bit of the action. Trophy Five-a-Side Field of Honor, brought to you by Kwese Free Sports, the official broadcast partners.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service. To set this stage for our discussion this morning, here is Abdul Malik Adiwo with a background report.
Beyond the security of lives and properties, the earnest desire that prompted Nigerians to elect President Muhammadu Buhari in the 2015 general elections was the need to fight corruption and resuscitate the aligning economy. Though the administration was welcomed by recession, its determination to wriggle the country out through the ERGP, experts say, assisted the country back on the path of economic growth. With mega resources and a lot to do, the government kept faith with the economic recovery and growth plan ERGP, a development plan that is faithfully implemented to wean the economy off oil and gas by diversifying into other sectors. That, experts say, has started paying off as the country has witnessed successes in agriculture. The geometric rise in the quantity and quality of local rice have saved the country billions of dollars in foreign exchange. The value-added chain in the sector also led to the creation of millions of jobs and wealth to either to a section of the population that had resigned to faith or poverty and helplessness. The mining sector, which is also identified to be a viable alternative, is witnessing reforms that are not only attracting investors, but also changing the narratives of lacking immense plenty, as artisanal miners that used to work hard but gain less are beginning to get the right rewards for their labor and also contributing to the GDP. The hard stance of the government on corruption is also said to be gaining investors' confidence in Nigeria, just like the improvement in the ease of doing business is boosting the economy. Government is affirming its stance on public finance management to include debt recovery, social investment, healthcare, infrastructure provision, access to credit particularly for agricultural sector, power sector funding, aviation, and housing, among others. Experts say the economy is stable and looks to do very much better later in the year. What indices are likely to shape Nigerian's economy this year? This and many more are questions yearning for answers on Good Morning Nigeria shortly.
All right, thank you very much, Abdul Malik Adio, for that background report. We have with us in the studios Dr. Okechukwu Enelama, is Minister of Trade, Industry and Investment. Honorable Minister, pleasure to have you with us on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Also here with us in the studios is a familiar face on Good Morning Nigeria. It's an economist and a public affairs analyst, Niyi Akinsiju. Niyi, delighted to have you again.
Always. Thank you so much. A pleasure.
All right. So, Jumain?
Yeah, I'll start with the Minister. Good morning. How would you assess the trade and investment sector of the economy in the last 4 years?
Thank you. So, as you know, my portfolio is industry, trade, and investment. And the three are linked in the sense that, good trade, fair trade, effective trade is kind of trade that is profitable for both sides and ultimately requires investment that would then lead to industry and create jobs for us. That's what we want. Now, I would say that the industry, trade, and investment sectors are central to the economic recovery and growth plan in the sense that this is really the interface with the private sector. Those that indulge in industry, trade, and investment are primarily the private sector and both SMEs largely, but also larger businesses, not just local, but also international. We had a 5-point plan to start. The number one plan, or number one point in our plan, in our 5-point plan, was to focus on enabling environment and making it easier to do business in our country. This is the vision of the president, that Nigeria will be one of the easiest places to do business in the world. That's not where we're starting from, but that's where we're going to. And I believe that with the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council, which was launched by the president, and that has its own secretariat, dedicated secretariat called the Enabling Business Environment Secretariat, and all the reforms that have taken place, that journey has started, and I believe that the journey will go very far. The second part of that agenda for the economy is focused on industrialization. You will agree with me that we need a lot of jobs in Nigeria. And there is no question that a major part of the answer to the jobs that we need is industrialization. And we've taken 3 specific steps that are bearing fruit that I'd like to share with our audience this morning. But let me deal with the other 3 before I come back to that. The third thing we have focused on is, proactive investment. In other words, attracting the kind of investments that are good for Nigeria. Both domestic and international investments, both foreign direct investment and other forms of investment. The fourth area is on trade, basically focusing on what you might call, not just market access for our own goods, which means exports, but also getting into the kind of partnerships, trade agreements that be favorable, domestic, regional, and global or international. And then finally, all the things we're doing, we always focus on small and medium enterprises, or better still, micro, small and medium enterprises. And our ministry has been the sort of, if you will, the focal ministry or the line ministry when it comes to trying to make sure that MSMEs will address some of their most basic needs, whether it's in terms of funding or capacity building or, market access and so on and so forth. I'll be happy to deal with each of these parts and the progress we have made.
So far.
Earlier, you paused yourself and said you will return to industrialization.
Yes.
Yes. So what are the issues there?
Thank you for coming back. So like I said, on industrialization, when we came in, we took some specific steps. Well, let me preface what I'm going to say by making the point again that industrialization is the key to diversification. When we talk about diversifying the economy away from oil, yes, you have services, but a piece that will make a real difference is industrialization. And there, we've taken 3 specific steps that I think will make a big difference. First is that we inherited a policy document called the Nigeria Industry Revolution Plan, the Nigeria Industrial Revolution Plan, which basically is called NRP, which is focused on the steps you need to take to achieve massive industrialization. We have been implementing that strategy because the strategy document itself is fine. Its implementation has been the issue. In order to implement it, we launched an industrial council. It's called the Industrial Policy and Competitiveness Advisory Council in full. That council is a partnership or a council that includes private sector members who are involved in industry across all sectors, and the leading executives in government, the senior members of government, ministers, and is chaired by the vice president. And of course, the council itself was launched by the president, so it's a presidential council. And that council meets once a month, and that's a council that has basically come up with the areas that we need to address, and it's come up with at least 6 areas for intervention: funding, critical infrastructure, training and skills acquisition for workers, trade and market access, and policy. And in all these areas, and in fact, the 6th one is around working with the states, And in all these areas, we've made progress. So that's the first intervention, the launch of this industrial council, which is working quite well. The second one has to do with the focus on special economic zones and industrial parks. Basically, when the president took office, he went to China, some of you will remember, in 2016, and we went with him. And we went around and saw the industrial parks in China and the critical difference they made. These are basically centers, industrial infrastructure. They're industrial cities where all the infrastructure is there that make manufacturing and producing goods and services, adding value to goods and services easier. And this is something that, if not all, most countries that have industrialized successfully have found a way to do this. Because the truth is that Nigeria is a large country. You can't provide all the infrastructure we need in one swoop. So how do you tackle it? The wisdom that has emerged is that the best way to tackle it is to take particular centers and provide the resources there. So we basically launched a program called Made in Nigeria for Export. The whole idea being that you want to have competitive centers of excellence where the things you produce them to such quality and at such competitive cost that even if you didn't sell it, you can even sell them abroad if you wanted. And so that program has been launched by the president and is ongoing. And then the third area, and the third and final area, which is really key, is the sectoral reforms. The reforms we're doing in specific sectors where we ought to have an advantage. Agro-processing, for instance, things as basic as tomato, as cashew, as cassava, basically as cotton, textile, and garments. How do we make sure we come back or bring back those glory days that we've lost? Basically by, providing the things that the farmers need and all the other things that will help you go from agriculture to industrial processing. And in each of these areas, there has been presidential intervention, has been, cabinet level policies, and I believe that we'll see the results as we go on.
While we are still on the issue of industrialization, tell us some more about the special economic zones as well as industrial parks. The president has launched the program. Where are the industrial zones taking off? Where are the special economic zones?
Thank you. So I think the first point to make is that our objective is that these industrial parks and zones should cover all the country eventually, because clearly you want industry everywhere and you want to create employment everywhere. But what we have done is, first of all, we have 2 existing industrial parks that belong to the federal government, one in Kano, the other in Calabar. So there is a plan to basically resuscitate them. So government is spending on them to make them better, but also going further to look for partners to partner with us to operate them to world-class standards. And that process is ongoing. We're working with the Bureau of Public Enterprises, to commercialize those parks, to bring in private sector partners in a way that will make them operate to world class. And then we're doing some new centers, and those fall into 2 categories. One are the centers we have identified that will be demonstration centers. There's one in Lekki, in Lagos, that is supposed to be for export, that we are going to focus on textile and agro processing. There's another one in Abia. Enyimba is actually between Abia and Port Harcourt. It's called the Enyimba Industrial City. And then there's another one that we're doing in Funtua and Katsina that is going to be focused on cotton and ginning, just the things to do with cotton, textile, and garments. Now, those 3 are ongoing. Obviously, we're also doing feasibility studies for 6 more across the country. So it's going to be a program that will last for the next 10, 20, 30 years, we hope. In other words, we want an industrialization program that will continue as part of a long-term plan, but obviously you have to start from where you are today.
What is the linkage between the state governments and the federal government on the industrial parks? Because some state governments have also been talking about establishing their own industrial parks. Abia State Governor, of course, has been a guest on Good Morning Nigeria. He's talked about that. The Edo State government is also proceeding with his own industrial park. So what is the linkage or relationship?
It's an excellent question, because I should have said more on that, because if you find all the industrial parks we're doing as partnerships between the federal government, the state governments, and the private sector, because each part has a critical role to play, or each partner has or player, or each one of them has a critical role to play. To focus on the state governments, which is the thrust of your question, as you know, land is controlled by the state government. So in every one of those industrial parks, the land has been provided by the state government. So if you look at the Abia State example you mentioned, Abia State actually provided the land, about 9,000 hectares of land. 9,000 hectares of land is huge. It's like about 3 big cities. And, and there's a private sector player that is a developer. And then the government basically that's the federal government is a partner, and we're working with them both on the funding, on attracting the investors, the full gamut. The same thing is happening in Lekki, where Lagos State government has provided 1,000 hectares of land in the Lekki Free Trade Zone, and we're going to work with them on, like I said, on agro processing and on textiles. The same thing is happening in Katsina, and of course, in the case of, because the land again is coming from the state, and we're going to work with all the outgrowers and small growers that are into cotton, to provide all the things they need, from seedling to financing to fertilizer and then all the way to how you then receive those cotton and products and process them, in that industrial park.
There was a story a few weeks ago coming out of the Senate with regard to some 14.3 billion which the Senate was directing NEBSA to return to the Treasury on account of some issues pertaining to whether the federal government should be funding a private company or whether indeed NEBSA itself should have the funds. We haven't heard much out of that. Has the matter been resolved?
Well, the matter is being resolved, and I think will be resolved. So let me explain that. I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the basic things we need to do right is communication, and do it, much more across the tiers and arms of government, but also with the larger public. So as you can imagine, this program we've launched, this program has been going on now for the last 12 to 18 months. And clearly, the plan is to have a public-private partnership model for getting this thing done, just like I said, that we're partnering with state governments and we're partnering with private sector. So what we have decided to do is to basically partner with other people who are interested in investing in industrial parks, especially economic zones, across Africa, who have decided to partner with us. In that partnership, we have formed a vehicle, which was approved by the cabinet and has been something that has been, part of our budget cycle for the last 2-3 years. And that vehicle is called the Nigeria Special Economic Zones Investment Company, NCESCO. Now that vehicle, which is going to be a partnership between the federal government and other partners like Afrexim Bank, Bank of Industry, and so on and so forth, is where we need to bring in our own investment, just like the Nigerian LNG model. Now, the funds that we want to bring into that vehicle, to partner with these people, obviously went through the full process of our appropriation. First, it was taken to the Federal Executive Council where we obtained the necessary approvals, and then it went through the budget cycle. Now, when it came to the first time the government is actually releasing money for that vehicle, even though we've been working on it for over 18 months, is this year. And when the Senate understood that money was finally going to go to it, and this money was appropriated by the Senate and approved by the cabinet, they basically questioned why that money is leaving, as it were, the government to go into this partnership. Obviously we've gone through the paperwork and explained all that to them, that it's part of a much broader partnership. And if you recall, on February 8th, 2019, it was a Friday, the president actually hosted these investors in a signing ceremony where the agreement was formally signed, the agreement, to basically go into this public-private partnership and to go into this, particular investment. So I think it's something that's why I talked about communication. The Senate, who we've met with and we're working with to resolve and answer all their questions, basically felt that they were not sufficiently informed on it, even though, like I said, it went through appropriation, not just in 2019, where it first came up, or where it came up now, but also in 2017 and 2018. So I think it's a question of communication between the two arms of government.
You talked about resolving the issues. That also has to do because the Senate raised a number of points, particularly the chairman of the relevant Senate committee. He was talking about the share structure. He was talking about, of course, matters relating to the memos of associations. So look, who owns the shares? I think that's one of their key points.
Yes. No, he asked that question, and rightly so. So basically, the structure of this public-private partnership is that the federal government will own 25%, and the remaining 75% will go to all these other investors. And that was the subject of the agreement that the president hosted on February 8, 2019. Now, what's happening is that process, obviously, after you sign the agreement, you go through a process of, the transfer of the shares, they are becoming directors. That's the process that is going on now. Now, what has happened is that the shares were held in trust, the 75%, by a professional, trust service company. And the Senate was questioning, who is this trust? But obviously, that's what the trusts are there for. But in any event, by the reason of these agreements that have been signed, those shares are now being transferred, to these other shareholders, as of course, and they will also bring in their own funding, just like we are working to bring in our own funding. And that's quite normal. That's how public-private partnerships are done. Yes.
You spoke earlier about Nigeria being a large country, and 60% of Nigerians are below 40. All these documents and policies on investment, how does it translate into job employment so that we can, fight against youth restiveness and all that? How do you translate it into employing these youth and making them productive?
It's an excellent question because, like I said at the beginning, if you think about why industrialization, of course, you could give several important reasons like diversify economy, sources of foreign exchange, government revenues. But I would argue, or I would say the most important is job creation. And if you think about even just this particular program we've talked about, the project made in Nigeria for export and this Nigeria Special Economic Zone platform that we've created with other investors, it's targeting to create 1.5 million direct jobs in these industrial parks over the next 5 years. And we understand that for every one job you create in manufacturing, you create 6 indirect jobs in terms of suppliers, in terms of, logistics and all the things that go on around a big industrial complex. Therefore, we potentially could be creating, anywhere up to, 10 million jobs with this exercise. So it's a very important part of the program. And I believe that the job creation will happen at pace. But as you know, until you build the parks and actually start the process, you don't create jobs from the actual industry. You create jobs from the construction. So there's also jobs that will come out of the construction as we go into full construction mode. Obviously, that's why we need to set up this business, this company, and these investments, and make our investments as quickly as possible.
All right. So while we are foraging for new investors, creating new special economic zones and industrial parks, what is the status of existing industries?
Well, the question of existing industries and industrial parks are intertwined in some respects, right? Because existing industries, by that you mean what is the status of the existing players in industry? And you have to think about it along those same 3 lines I talked about. My conviction is that if we do those 3 things, these 3 policy thrusts of this President Muhammadu Buhari government well, you will solve the problem of existing industries. Let me start with the first point on Industrial Council. You first need to hear from them what are the problems they face. You know, they were the ones that identified these 6 focal areas that, you know, and I can even go and break it down for you further. Critical infrastructure. You know, they want the infrastructure that has been lost to be rebuilt, like for the industry. They want access to financing at interest rates or costs that are affordable and that are long-term, so they can plan with it. They want policy stability. These are the things that they want market access for their goods and services. They want the people, the workers, to acquire skills and for vocational training to come back into the fore the way it used to be. And then finally, they also want the work with the state governments, right? You know, to be such that, like, whether it's multiple taxation or to do with land and all the other things they need, they want that partnership to be developed as you asked earlier. So that's where the like they say, where the rubber hits the road or meets the road. And our view is that, like, that's why we must continue that partnership. Now, you know that Bank of Industry, for instance, has recapitalized in a way to actually give more money to industry. We're working actively on infrastructure, including power. So all these things are interconnected. The important thing is that if we stay the course, we will definitely industrialize our country and industries will come back.
Indeed, industrialization, they say, is the breath that any country's economy needs to move in. And even developed countries are now moving towards industrialization. How do we key in fully into this, you know, vis-a-vis export and import of goods from, since exportation has been stopped by the federal government of goods and services from other countries? So how can we key in to this industrialization shift by other developed and developing countries?
I'll make 2 observations on that. First, this is where industrialization links to trade, because trade is basically the linkage you have with other countries and other markets and even domestically. And if you look at what we're doing there, I think a very important part of trade is your ability to negotiate favorable or fair agreement for yourself. In the past, we didn't have any agency focused on these negotiations. This government, President Muhammadu Buhari government, has launched something or established the Nigeria Office for Trade Negotiations, which is just focused on making sure that we negotiate favorable agreements. You know, that's one. Number 2 is that, like they say, charity begins at home. So if you look at the relationship within ECOWAS and then the Africa, where we are launching this new trade agreement, as you know, the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement or Zone, and then you go on further afield. In all these areas, we need to enter the right agreements. The third area is that you also need to avoid, basically, some of the problems that undermine trade effectiveness, you know, like dumping, smuggling, you know, people bringing substandard goods in here from other parts of the world. All those things, you know, we have focused on. Let me also say, when you are talking about discouraging imports, we are not necessarily discouraging imports wholesale. What we are saying is that those things we can produce here, we should produce them.
Like toothpick?
Well, toothpick for sure we can produce here, on you know, both on a lighter note and a serious note. But certainly it includes things like tomato, you know, things like, you know, oil palm and the derivatives, things like cocoa. You know, the only thing is that, like, there's always a bit of, you know, a timing difference. The important thing is that, like, we have to keep fit. Every country that has industrialized had some kind of industrial policy. Industrial policy means that you're making choices about what you produce and what you will not produce. And our view is that we must produce those goods that can be produced here, and we must encourage those people who want to produce it here.
All right, Honorable Minister, thank you very much. We've actually focused on 2 principal issues: broad policy framework, industrialization, and the aspect you just got into now, which is trade. We will return to deal with trade with you in greater detail. But let's bring in our other guest whom we introduced a while ago. That's Niyi Akinseju, who is an economist. Niyi, of course, there are usually numbers. You hear about foreign direct investment, portfolio investment. I mean, those ones, the hot money that normally will bring into the stock market and then take off with it. But my colleague Jumai asked a question. At the end of the day, what is the translation of all of this into jobs and therefore well-being? So what are we seeing? Existing industries or existing players, you know, on the industrial platform, what is it that we are seeing or we have seen in the last 4 years?
I think essentially we need to understand the context of policy and policy implementation. There's always a time lag, you know. I think what had been our deficiency from time is a lack of ideology to our policies. So much that when you come out with a policy, there's no consensuousness, you know, and direction in implementation. So if you have an industrial revolutionary plan and you were not implementing, you won't see the effect. For me, I had always been thankful for the recession because for the first time in over 30 years, we now have an economic recovery growth plan that is being properly conceptualized and properly implemented. And you can also see a reflection of the results, in the last 3 years or so. One, you measure your purchasing managers index, your manufacturers PMI. Over the last 16 months, we've recorded an above 50 points, And once you are recording 50 points in your PMI, especially your manufacturer's PMI, it means that you are doing good. Now, we're now just on the margin of 50. We've done a 56 above. This month, last month, March, we are doing 57. It means that industries are flourishing. Inventories are properly managed. Employment is on the increase. Now, it may take a while for those figures to start impacting the environment, but there are figures at play. The Manufacturers Associations of Nigeria's CEOs CEOs Confidence Index, the Q1 2019, also went above 50%. But perhaps the greater implication for me is the outlook of these CEOs, to the extent that they are believing in a stronger growth going forward in 2019, in terms of confidence, in terms of employment opportunities for Nigerians, in terms of production capacity. But what usually interests me most, is when we talk about foreign direct investment, and particularly about functional investments. Like you said, I usually don't do business with hot money, but money that comes into Nigeria, goes into productive activities and impact Nigerians, directly. In 2008, we had a peak of $5 billion of such investment. But by 2009, at the first slight signal of the global meltdown, we saw companies moving out of Nigeria in drove. So much that by 2012, we had about 108 or so companies that had moved out of Nigeria.
Why was that?
Because our policies were not properly anchored. So at the first sign of trouble, investors will carry their loads and move out of the country. Now, we are also now seeing companies coming back. I know specifically of a Dunlop that had made declaration that it was coming back into Nigeria. It had turned itself from a production entity to a trading concern. Now it says the environment is enabled enough for it to come reestablish its plants. And we have so many of that, especially the auto companies too, that are doing their knockdown. And the last I heard was that Honda was even going beyond just assembling knockdown parts, to manufacturing some set of parts, So what I'm saying essentially is that as we go forward, I am seeing a reflection of the results, of these policies. And perhaps more than that, the ideological undercurrent of these policies. Many people will not want to say that the limitation on assessing foreign exchange by the 43 items, are principally protective policy. And for God's sake, you have a right to protect your industry. Like the Honorable Minister said, these items, one, you are not importing. It also translates to mean that those that are producing it in other jurisdictions can also come in here into Nigeria and produce them. When you produce them, you manufacture them in Nigeria, you provide employment opportunities, I also think the minister should tell us more, on the Focus Lab, because I think it's a very innovative initiative where you brought in all stakeholders in the private sector, in the public sector, to resolve immediate challenges and bottlenecks, And from my readings of it, it's a huge opportunity waiting to unleash, the potentials of the Nigerian economy.
That's right. Neil, thanks a lot. I mean, the Focus Labs was also an issue we took on here on Good Morning Nigeria with a number of guests when the first of those Focus Labs was taken up. But I would like the Honorable Minister, again, to speak to aspects related to what the ordinary man sees. You know, they will hear about these policies and programs and projects, and they're asking themselves, how do you reconcile this with also the growing numbers of the unemployed? I mean, this is what the federal government is doing. What are we getting in terms of aggregate from the exertions, talking about it, the state governments?
It's an important question because I agree completely that whatever we're doing has to translate to jobs. You know, if you ask me, how would you boil down your policy to effect, right, or to results, or to what outcomes you want? I'll say jobs, jobs, jobs. You know, so there is no question that, like, the policies we have undertaken, you know, must create jobs. Our view is that, like, you have to think of it in at least 3 or 4 areas where I think you would have that encounter that you're seeking with the common man. The first one is agriculture. You know, this government has been very pro-agriculture. I've lived in Nigeria for a long time. I don't know any government that has been more pro-agriculture than President Muhammadu Buhari and this government. And also the Minister Audu Obe. You know, and the results are there. Whether it's a fertilizer program that halved the cost of fertilizer, or people going back to farms, or the Anchor Borrowers program of the Central Bank of Nigeria that basically made funding available at very low costs. You know, these things are real. You know, there is a saying that, like, you know, at times when something is working, right, people don't speak up. So you tend to hear more from those who are complaining. You know what I mean? But I'm sure that there are millions, you know, some people have put the numbers at close to 8 million that have benefited from this agricultural revolution. You know, the Anchor Borrowers program, the people going back to farms, and new jobs have been created, particularly around the rural areas. Now, that's very helpful. But I do agree with you that we also have to think about jobs in terms of the urban areas, because a lot of people are also in the urban areas. That's where services come in. You know, so if you look at what is happening with digital economy, with technology, and with just services generally, it's actually created a lot of jobs. The entertainment industry, it's created a lot of jobs. So we also must encourage those, and we also must treat those jobs as important. That leads me to the third point, which is what broadly you call the informal sector. You know, Nigeria is a country where the informal sector is important, meaning a lot of people are outside formal employment. You know, micro, small, and medium enterprises are over 35 million of them. You know, and a lot of people are. So we have to encourage entrepreneurship, which is why the enabling environment, you know, this is the view of the president, which we share as a government, you know, that if there is one thing we must do for Nigerians, make Nigeria easier for them to live in and to operate in. If you do that, they will take care of themselves. We may not capture it in our statistics. They may not even complain, or they may not say anything, but you will see the results on the streets. You know, but I think the final point I want to make is what we're going to do going forward. And I believe that what we're going to do is anchored on 3 policy thrusts. One is infrastructure. We've started, but it is our commitment, you know, as the president goes on, you know, to just be even more resolute and more committed to providing infrastructure, including looking at alternative sources of funding for infrastructure, which then leads me to the importance of investment. We're going to be partnering with all kinds of investors to build out our infrastructure. Some of it you've seen already with partners with the Chinese for our railway and some of our other infrastructure like aviation and telecoms and so on. We want to broaden that partnership because, you know, let's face it, if you broaden the infrastructure, you will actually create an environment where the people can succeed. The other thing we are focused on is this industrialization I've talked about. I believe that, like, going forward, the results will start to show, and will start to show in a very massive way. And then finally, let me say that the subject of creating the right enabling environment is all-encompassing, meaning that, like, it's a project will continue, you know, not just in the life of this government, but I hope even successive governments. Why? Because, you know, let's focus. I'll end with a story. You know, this is one of the classics, you know, from the scriptures. If you know the story of Solomon in the Bible, who was a great king, you know, basically when he passed on, his son took over from him. And the people said, just make it easier for us and we'll be loyal and we'll enjoy, you know, of course, he got wrong advice and did not do that. But it's also like a parable. It's also like, you know, like a wise saying that if you create the environment for the people, then I think Nigeria will prosper.
Talking about environment, investment cannot thrive without some factors, that is power. what have you been doing to ensure that the power sector contributes to the investment and commerce in Nigeria?
I think the general agreement of, and this is even by previous governments, everybody agrees power is important. I think the real difference is that who would do something about power and do something that would work. Right from President Obasanjo's time, power has been, and we have to have the humility to say it's a complex problem and nobody has been able to solve it. But I would say this government has certainly made progress, and there is a plan that is emerging that will make more progress. So if you look at the numbers, at least, you see that, like, in terms of the power that is generated, it certainly doubled from when the government started to. It was used to hover around 4,000, give or take. Now it's certainly 8,000, depending on whether you include stranded power. Now, if you include stranded power, it's even 10,000. When I say stranded power, that is not getting into the grid yet.
So how does it reflect into the investment sector?
Then you go to distribution, because, you generate the power, you transmit it, then you distribute it. I think the distribution sector needs capital. It's hungry for investment, because what happened is that, like, it was bought by entrepreneurs, and those entrepreneurs, do not have enough capital. So one of the things the government is looking at are creative ways for providing the funding and build out the distribution, and also alternative ways, which is why you have this eligible customer program and other things, so that those that, need the power can come and get it directly, wholesale, and not always be retail.
Incidentally, we had the Minister of Power, Works and Housing on our program yesterday, and he talked about aspects of this and the challenges still arising from the power value chain. But before NIE comes in again, there's an aspect. Again, the linkages are there. The campaign for Made in Nigeria, an aspect relating to industrialization, and then smuggling and dumping. How are we dealing with this? How is Made in Nigeria doing? And how are we tackling smuggling? The other day, rice farmers were complaining that their efforts were being undermined, by the wave of smuggling of rice into the country. But in general, how are we doing with Made in Nigeria?
It's an excellent point, and the key point you make, which I would like to underscore or emphasize, is that, like, these things are linked. They are linkages, right? And I'm glad, and I like the way you linked Made in Nigeria to smuggling, because at times people act as if, like, I'm trading, why wouldn't you let me trade? But if you are trading in substandard goods, in goods that are smuggled like rice, you're actually working against Made in Nigeria, because the truth is that we can produce rice here and enough. Nobody questions whether we can produce enough rice. The question is, why is rice being dumped here? At times, rice that may even be unhealthy, right? Because I understand some of the rice, to the extent may have expired, based on how they are stored and everything. And therefore, the whole issue of food security and what the president set up called the Food Security Council becomes doubly important, because it has a direct bearing on the economy. One of the things that has always puzzled me, and when I say puzzled me, that I find it as a challenge, is that, like, in a lot of other countries, the question is what their policy is. Once the policy is made, it's enforced. There's no question of compliance. So why is it that in Nigeria, we can actually make policies and people defy those policies and bring in the goods anyway? And you will agree with me that, like, if you have that level of interference with policy, it doesn't matter who it is, you will struggle. So I think this Food Security Council and securing our borders and making sure that, like, substandard goods are not coming in, it just makes sense. It could even go as bad as arms. So there is no way you look at the argument where you won't come back to saying that's something that needs to stop anyway. The good news is that there are different arms and parts of government dealing with this. So I know that there is a council that is focused on just dealing with smuggling and food security from the point of view of, smuggling and things like that. Now, when it comes to Made in Nigeria, the point to make is that, like, again, it's multifaceted, right? You have to encourage local production, which we've talked about. You have to encourage local procurement, which is Executive Order 3, because those people need somebody to buy their goods. That's why government said we'll lead by example by ensuring that 40% of our purchases is bought from these SME-type local producers, and that policy is gradually being enforced. You also have to link it to, the whole infrastructure thing, which is where you started from, by making it more competitive to produce here, which is where power comes in, where these industrial sites and industrial parks and clusters come in. These are things other countries have done. In some respects, Nigeria is a late entrant. I think the key is focus on policy implementation. I'm 100% sure that if we implement our policies, we will get the same results.
I'm wondering, NIE, public policy analysis is often very interesting in Nigeria. And you hear from generation to generation, from regime to regime, administration to administration, that our problem isn't exactly policy, but implementation. And the Honorable Minister has also touched on that. And it's something that, for those who have been in the policy space, are familiar with. How do we deal with this devil?
Yeah, it's really devil. But, well, I think given the 2015-2019 scenario, we can see a difference in truth. How many policies have we had in the past? The fact that we continue, to abandon, so to say, policy initiatives of the past exhibit the fact that they were not effective or they were not effectively implemented. Now, I think ERGP is a difference, because there are milestones in the ERGP per period, per time and all that you can measure. So far, so good. We can say we are producing rice. It is part of the proposed milestone in the ERGP that by 2020 we should be self-sufficient in the production of rice. In the meantime, there is smuggling. There's smuggling. Now, of course, that again is a challenge that would have been taken care of by the ERGP itself. The policy position about non-assessing foreign exchange is a clear bulwark against smuggling. Because for me, people said 20 million bags of rice were smuggled into the country. And I said, good. Those people that smuggled that amount must have subsidized our economy because you were not assessing our foreign exchange, And I think the CBN had also gone forward, further to say that if you smuggled in money, smuggled in rice, and you were tracked, you will be sanctioned for it because that would be tantamount to money laundering too, because you were not supposed to access forex formally in the Nigerian system. So I think as a whole, there's so far so good. There's consensuousness in the implementation of the ERGP. I am hoping, that we'll continue with this momentum. The fact that we have been able to reduce, despite the inclement environments as well, the fact that we have been able to reduce food inflation, from a high of 23% to 13 plus now, and in fact the general CPI to 11.24 from a high of 18.7. I think we are moving forward.
I'm just thinking now, and I'm asking this question: does our policy implementation challenge arise from the fact that we have too many silos, too many power centers? And ordinarily, you would expect that the fulcrum for monitoring, implementation, and therefore control ultimately will reside with the bureaucracy to say, this is what we are doing. But where you have too many powers, we're talking about smuggling now. Others will just be doing that. Some people will come from the presidency. Presidency is very large, not the president's office. They will do that. CBN will do that. EFCC, we're talking about money laundering. Are the power centers for policy implementation too diffuse as to become efficient?
Well, yes, it used to. But like the Honorable Minister noted, you also have a council, an industry council now. You have a PBEC. The PBEC is an interministerial a platform, as it were. Even for the Food Security Council, it's also interministerial. So it does mean that there's an integrated approach, to attending to these challenges. So I think that is how to go forward anyway. And of course, more than that, the ideological undercurrent is important. That is what will drive us. If we say we are protecting our industries, we must be committed to protecting our industry. But again, there's a need to continue to reorientate the Nigerian psyche. That trading is not about going to China, to Dubai, to bring in things, First, you are subtracting from our resources, from our collective resources. There was a time, the major trade, once you had $500, $1,000, was to go to Dubai and to go and bring synthetic materials, not even original, garments, shoes, and all that. Thankfully, the CBN, I am very sure the Ministry of Industry is also part of it, had also now taken on the challenge of revamping our textile sector. Nothing can be more encouraging
Well, that's the point that we will address when we return from this short break.
Move now! The red light won't kill you. Move now! To the disobey traffic law, they cause accidents. Me, I don't talk, say, I no go dey do am again, because change begins with me.
Cross the other side of the road.
I will no longer endanger my life crossing the express. Instead, I will use the bridge, because change begins with me.
Oga driver, stop this bus now, won't come down. I be one carry me past where they go.
Make I dey stop anyhow for road, they cause traffic wahala and accidents. So I go dey stop for the right bus stop, because change begins with me.
Change begins with me.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
All right, welcome back. And it's still Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We still have with us the Honorable Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment, Dr. Okechukwu Enalama, as well as Neya Kinsiju, who is an economist. We'll be talking about aspects of MITI, that's for short, of what we've seen in the last 4 years. Honorable Minister, I actually want to frame my question in the double barrel. On Monday on Good Morning Nigeria, where we started conversations on the economy, one of our guests, Professor Dama, is an economist at University of Abuja, made a point that we have seen over the years a broad range of incentives to the private sector, whether waivers or otherwise, or grants, but mostly waivers and concessions. And then we had from our Lagos Network studios another regular guest, is Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, that's Muda Yusuf. So in spite of all of these incentives to the private sector, there would appear to be no commensurate response in terms of industrializing, in terms of job creation, in terms of general productivity. Are we pouring water into a basket? That's one leg of the question. To say, look, all of these incentives that we are giving to the private sector, to industrialists and manufacturers, what is coming out of it? And the second point, which is also tied to this, is our system being oftentimes exploited by practitioners of capital flight? Niyi was making the point. If you don't have access to forex to import rice, where did you get the forex from to import rice and smuggle rice into the country? That's why I said double barrel.
Okay. The question is excellent. First, we have to understand that when you put the right framework, incentives, and policies in place, you'll get a result. Why that's important is that, there's something that is called the exceptionalism argument. It's important that we don't assume or accept that our situation is so unique that it defies treatment, because it's simply fundamentally not true. Now there are three things that if you get right, and I am 100% sure, you will get a result. One is infrastructure. I'm not saying it's easy to do, but if you do it right, you will get the result. Infrastructure, I stand to be corrected, is even more important than financial incentives. And the reason is that it's just one of those things that can eat up all the incentives if you don't do it. Which is why, we have to, stay committed to it and applaud the president's commitment to infrastructure. You are talking about perseverance and not changing policies. One of the strengths of the president is that he's been consistent on what it takes, to solve the problem. And that solution or that proposal, cannot be, it's unarguable. You can't argue that if you put in the infrastructure, and deal with the issue of corruption and rebuild the economy and tighten our security, that you will basically succeed. You can argue that how you're going to do it, how tough it is. That's one. The second thing is, that, like you said, incentives must come with consequence management. What do I mean by that? If you give an incentive and it's abused, it's not an incentive, right? In fact, there is ample evidence in behavioral sciences that when you have an incentive and everybody gets it, it disincentivizes those that are doing well. It basically creates not just mediocrity, but negative movement. It's a bit like an exam you do, and then the scholars who've been studying, and then some other people go and get the expo and write the same thing. I mean, it's a wash, right? So you are right that incentives, if they're not properly implemented, not only lose their effectiveness, but actually produce negative consequences. And in some respects, that's what we suffered from in the past. Which is why when we came, fortunately, we actually met things like the Pioneer Incentive had been suspended, the Export Expansion Grant had been suspended due to abuse, right? Because they incentivize genuine exporters and genuine investors, because everybody was getting it. Now that we've tightened it, we're already seeing results, like our experts on studio, Nii has said. We're seeing results. And this is something we have to, and that's why I started by saying Nigerians